You may have seen headlines towards the end of last year asking if Canada could be the newest country to participate in the Eurovision Song Contest. Why do we see those headlines? And more importantly, are they true? Could Canada be debuting on the Eurovision main stage sometime soon? The answer might surprise you, but it's no. Or it's incredibly unlikely. But why? There's so many factors that go towards Canada's eventual, hopefully, participation in Eurovision that we may as well break them down here and figure out exactly what needs to happen to get Canada on that stage. The reason you saw the headlines saying that Canada was exploring participating at the Eurovision Song Contest comes back to Canada's federal budget that was released towards the end of 2025. In that budget, there was a line item for CBC and CBC Radio Canada, they're Canada's public broadcasters, to explore participating at Eurovision. Now, this makes a lot of sense. Given the state of the world at the moment, Canada's Prime Minister Mark Carney has made no secret of the fact that he's trying to strengthen ties between Canada and Europe. And boy howdy, if you're going to strengthen cultural ties, Eurovision's a pretty good place to start. There's definitely political will. After all, when Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney met Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese during a trip down under, he also tweeted about how Gojo was robbed at the 2025 Eurovision Song Contest Grand Final. Personally, I think it's a great idea and I would love to see Canada at Eurovision. But they don't just let anyone perform. So if you're thinking, I don't see what the issue is, I mean Australia does it, why can't Canada too? There's a whole bunch of reasons why. First thing to say is that geography does not matter. Australia participates. Clearly, Australia and Canada both famously not in Europe. But geographical distance doesn't really mean that much. There's a whole host of other countries that either participate now or have in the past that are geographically not generally considered to be in Europe. I think some people think that Europe, the geopolitical entity, puts on the Eurovision Song Contest, and that's just not the case. The Eurovision Song Contest is put on by the European Broadcasting Union. The EBU is basically a modern-day collective of public broadcasters. Public broadcasters are things like CBC in Canada, PBS in the States, ABC in Australia, BBC in the UK, RTE in Ireland, RAI in Italy. I could go on, but all of these national public broadcasters. The EBU was actually started way back in the day to help facilitate things like signal sharing and which bandwidth everyone was broadcasting on, so you didn't have 20 television stations on the same frequency. It's since evolved a lot. There is a lot of things that the EBU does. If you want to find out more, go read the Wikipedia page because there's just too many to get into here. Which is to say, the main thing that the EBU does is manage Eurovision and Euroradio, which are these giant telecommunications networks that span the breadth of the European broadcasting area, geographically kind of the boundaries of the EBU's influence. Now, Eurovision is technically the name of this broadcast telecommunication network. The Eurovision Song Contest, which we often just call Eurovision, is the biggest event that the EBU hosts every year. So there is a technical difference, but most of the time when you hear the word Eurovision, you can assume that people are just talking about the song contest. Now, for broadcasters who are within the European broadcasting area that pay their fees to the EBU, they are all automatically invited to Eurovision, with some terms and conditions. Now, there's a bunch of broadcasters from outside the European broadcasting area, like in Australia and in Canada, that pay to become associate members of the EBU. That's a different tier of membership that doesn't automatically guarantee participation in Eurovision events like the Song Contest. Because it's notable that other associate members have been invited to different Eurovision events throughout the years. Kazakhstan competed in a few years of Junior Eurovision, which is the song contest for under 16s. And even Canada has taken place at the end of the 80s in something called the Young Dancers Competition. For associate members to participate in the contest, they actually need an invitation from the EBU. Australia famously and somewhat controversially received that invitation in 2015. And you might think, well, Canada's also an associate member, why can't they just write in and ask for an invitation and get one? Well, the situation is kind of very different between Australia and Canada. We're going to get into it. Firstly, in order to participate in the Eurovision Song Contest, the broadcaster must air the grand final of the contest, as well as the semi-final that their country is participating in. Ideally both, but you can get away with just doing the one. And in Canada, the contest has actually been broadcast before. I believe in 1977, the CBC, Canada's national broadcaster, did broadcast the contest, but way more recently, in 2014 and 2015, Out TV, which is a Canadian queer specialty broadcaster, showed the competition. However, they did so on a delay. The contest is usually in May, but they aired it in June. But more recently, in 2019 and 2021, Omni, which is a multicultural network in Canada, aired the grand final as well. As far as I can tell, at no point in the past has Canada provided its own commentary on the Canadian broadcast feed. And there's a reason that Canada hasn't been broadcasting the contest all that regularly. It's just ratings. It's really expensive to show the contest, and if these broadcasters aren't seeing a return on their investment, there's very little incentive for them to keep airing the contest. And that's probably why we don't see it aired on Canadian TV regularly or live. And this is perhaps the #1 thing that might make the EBU a little hesitant to offer Canada a spot at the grand final. If you compare it to Australia, which of course this comparison is coming, Australia were Eurovision mega fans. Australia had been broadcasting the contest since all the way back in 1983. That's 32 years of showing a contest that we weren't participating in, just because Australians loved it so much. Moreover, Australia had begun commentating on their feed or borrowing the BBC's commentary feed for well over a decade, since at least 2001, and since 2012, they've actually sent commentators over to the contest to provide live commentary from the arena. That's a huge investment for something that Australians weren't actually participating in. Now, when Australia did finally receive their invite to participate in 2015, it was supposed to be a one-off thing. Australia had actually been involved in some of the interval acts in the years preceding, but it was a huge deal, and Australia did really well in 2015, so they brought us back for every year since. And in 2016, we nearly won. So Canada just doesn't have a broadcaster now who's willing to put that much time and investment into airing and producing a package for Canadian audiences. And thus it's stuck in this kind of catch-22 where, because there's not enough fan support, they don't want to broadcast it, and because they're not broadcasting it, people have a hard time finding out about it and getting on board. But the internet is shaking things up in kind of an exciting way. And I'm not saying it couldn't happen. For all we know, Canada could write the EBU tomorrow and then they'll say, yeah, sure, why not? Come on board. But I think they'll have a better shot at swaying the EBU if a broadcaster steps up to the plate and decides to start airing the contest regularly and sending Canadian commentators, or at least having them here locally to help flavor the competition for Canadian audiences. And if they're having a hard time figuring out who would do it for cheap, man, hey, I would love to. What can you, a Canadian Eurofan, do to help support Canada's eventual entry into Eurovision? Well, you could always, I don't know, pick up a camera and create a YouTube channel about it all. But honestly, it's spreading the word. I've been going to Eurovision parties since I was in high school, and I still do them here in Canada, and there's a lot of people that are really bought into the drama and the fantastic music, the staging. They just get wrapped up in the whole experience of Eurovision. I think it's contagious. For both the EBU and Canada to take a risk on participating in Eurovision, there's just too many unknowns, and it would be a real shame if Canada got a special one-off invitation, went to the contest, only to kind of flop because there wasn't a lot of enthusiasm at home, or it got too expensive for a broadcaster that wasn't seeing return on that investment. It just could really be a mess. If there is broad popular support and a fan base that is ready to go to support Canada at Eurovision, then I think the EBU is much more likely to say yes. Don't be disheartened by this, because as I'm sure you're already aware, Canadians have competed at Eurovision before. There isn't and has never been a rule that says the participating singer at Eurovision on behalf of a country has to be from that country. Small microstates like San Marino are often represented by outside artists, because they kind of have to be. And as I'm sure you're aware, Celine Dion, famous Canadian, actually won the contest for Switzerland in 1988 by 1 point. That's not all. Lazara, France's 2023 entry in Eurovision, was originally from Montreal. Natasha St. Pierre also represented France in 2001. In 2016, Eureka represented Switzerland. Annie Cotton also repped Switzerland, but way back in 1993. And in 1986, Charisse Lawrence represented Luxembourg. And I'm sure there is like many, many more Canadians if you want to dig through the filing cabinet. And beyond that, back in 2022, there was actually an announcement that Canada would be creating its own Canada Eurovision Eurovision-style contest, where each of the provinces and territories would submit an artist to compete in a Canada-wide song contest. It seems to have fallen apart at some point. No one really knows what happens, by which I mean someone has to know exactly what happened with that, but they aren't writing articles on the internet that I can find. However, I think the fact that there was even that announcement reveals that Canada does have an appetite for this kind of content, which is, you know, a really great first step. Do you want to see Canada compete at Eurovision? No, I do, but leave your thoughts in the comments. And also, if you think Canada should participate, let me know who you think they should send. I've got some ideas, but that is for another video. I guess we just do this for a little while. Yeah, I love you too.